Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey guys.
Good morning.
Hi.
How you doing, Beth?
I'm making it.
Yeah, you will. Yeah, you will.
Yep. I've had a lot of help. So,
We all need it.
yep. And today is a work day.
Yeah. Hey, Vicky.
Hi, Jennifer.
Mute. How are
I
you
know.
doing?
Doing pretty good.
Good. Did you get to go see Robert?
Fair enough. Okay, cool. So then I can do that. Awesome. Yep. Then that's good.
Yeah, no worries.
Mm-hmm.
We'll take a look at it.
Thank you. It's not a big deal. I mean, I have my desktop, but yeah, it was just weird.
Yeah.
Dr. Dorner, you want to start us off?
I pledge allegiance
Allegiance
to the flag of the
of the
United
United States of America
and
and to the republic
for
for
which
it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under God, indivisible,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have 4 board members present and lots of great staff members. Mr. Ricca will not be joining us this morning. So item 4 is to approve recommendation to hire Devin, is it Catron?
Patron.
Or facilities manager.
Angela, do you want to?
Is she frozen still?
There we go. Yes, so we went through a competitive process with an interview team, and Mr. Catron has some great knowledge and skills and experience that he would bring to Kingman Unified School District as the facilities and maintenance manager, and therefore we would like to recommend his hire.
Thank you, Angela. Do we have any questions or a motion?
I'm curious how many people applied.
I believe we had about 12.
That's pretty good.
Hello.
I'll make the motion to approve the hire.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Ms. Weiser, second Ms. Shumway. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 4-0. Item 5, approve recommendation for modification to the name of PAC School.
Dr. Lucero, President Lucero, members of the board. I come to you with this recommendation after careful consideration of our current campus, Positive Alternative Campus. PAC has typically been known as PASS. It's our alternative high school program that was launched in 1991 by Mrs. Sandy McCoy. It was her vision to give students a place to go when they did not have the time or the typical life calendar to allow them to continue in a high school setting. Oftentimes at that era, there were young teen moms that could attend PASS and continue their education. And then after the babies were born, they could have the children with them on site and continue high school. And it has evolved, coming up on the 20-year anniversary next year, into a program that Kingman Unified School District really counts on. Both Lee Williams High School and Kingman High School have students lined up to attend the PAC program, where they can have a flexible schedule, have a mentor, small group instruction, a place to go when they really need that little bit of extra support. And all of this came from the vision of Sandy in 1991. And she has been with the program every day since. So we're getting ready to replace the sign down on the campus to call it the Positive Alternative Campus and replace the sign. And I would like to recommend that we add the name Sandy McCoy to the campus. So it would be known after your approval as the Sandy McCoy Positive Alternative Campus.
Thanks, Dr. Dorner. Any questions or comments? Ms. Weiser?
I really like this idea. I would like to go ahead and approve this, make this motion.
Okay, we have a motion. Was that second by Jen?
Yes.
Second by Ms. Shumway. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 4-0. Thank you, Dr. Dorner, for that suggestion.
Thank you, and I will make that announcement and appreciate the board approving this recommendation. Sandy really has left a legacy in this district, and I would like to talk with the board at future date on what we can look at as a district for all of people that may have left a mark in this community. We have some great folks in education, so we'll continue this discussion at future board meetings on other recommendations of a similar nature.
And will you keep the board informed when they're putting the sign up, like if you're going to have a ceremony or something, so we can get it on our calendar?
Absolutely, I will let you know. Thank you so much.
Okay, item 4 is discussion and possible action on how to proceed with reopening schools.
All right, Dr. Lucero, members of the board, as you know, as you very well know, our community has been in a pandemic, the entire world, for quite a while now, and it's really time that we start looking forward to the 2021 school year. It's a very emotionally driven topic. There are a lot of perspectives, a lot of thoughts and suggestions. And so we determined as a staff, a KUSD staff, that we really needed to do some research, take a look at the perspectives, make sure that we had a very collaborative and inclusive process where the voices of our community were heard. And then we're going to mix that with CDC recommendations and science and share with you the results of that research today, and then have a conversation. So, Mr. Pope, if you'll advance, we'll talk about the workshop goals. First of all, we're going to review the staff and parent survey data regarding the schools opening for next year. Then we'll take a look at CDC recommendations for schools reopening safely, followed by a review of possible calendars and instructional models for the KUSD schools to reopen. And throughout this process, hear from you as a school board on your recommendations while we work together to provide rationale for when and how our schools open. Now, I will start this off saying KUSD has sort of been ahead of the curve in a sense through this entire process. You know, we were looking at a board workshop to close schools before the state then closed the schools. And then we were looking at different instructional models and how to grade or not grade, and then the state would come out. So we always seem to be planning and researching, and then more information comes from the state. I anticipate that should happen in this case as well. I was in a meeting with State Superintendent Hoffman and Mojave County Superintendents a couple of weeks ago. We asked a lot of questions. We need answers on funding. There's some funding available to schools that we haven't seen yet. How and when will that funding be made available? When will the decision be made on whether schools should open or not? We asked all of those types of questions to Superintendent Hoffman during that meeting. And she did share with us that they have a lot of task force teams in place that they are looking at how and when to, not when to reopen schools, because that's really a board decision, but what should go into the reopening of schools, what recommendations does the Arizona Department of Education have, what funding will be available, where will there be flexible seat time. All of those kinds of questions are being taken under consideration at the state level right now, and we do not have the answers to that. So we've gone ahead with gathering our own research, coming up with our own models, putting various models into place, and now we're just in a holding pattern waiting for the state to tell us what's doable and allowable. And then there's a plan B for every question or every answer that might come back. So this is really a fact-finding or a fact-sharing workshop. And then the questions that we generate during this workshop, our team will work to get answers to. So the most important questions to consider, for Kingman Unified is, do we open in July 22nd or a later date, and why or why not? That's the main question. Our calendar is scheduled for July 22nd. Is that doable? And if it is, do we have the resources available to safely open? Because safety does remain a priority. Will Arizona vote to approve flexible seat time? Because if they do not vote to approve flexible seat time, that could be significant to our funding. Right now, students have to be in their seats for X number of hours and days to earn our complete funding. And if they're not in them and it's not approved to have them somewhere else, that's a problem. And then how does reopening a school benefit our families and staff, and how might reopening the schools negatively affect our staff? All right, Rob, next. So I'm going to have Robbie for a minute. I know you're going to hear a lot from me today, and you guys just jump in there if you want me to stop talking whenever you have thoughts or questions. But I think I'm going to build the scenario and give you our current context, and then we'll go into the conversation. So Rob, if you will go to the staff survey share sheet on the main, the original page. Okay, so if you go to form responses, which is where you're at. So I shared this with everybody who is in this workshop, the board members and the directors, but I also shared it with all 900 KUSD employees. So at any given time, if you look across the top of the screen, you can see who is in this document, looking at it and working with it. So this is a live district-wide document. Our goal is to be 100% transparent with everyone. Everything we do on this shared document, every word we type can be viewed by every single employee in real time. And I think that's super important. There is nothing going on behind the scenes at KUSD. So we received, I believe it's about 550 staff responses within 2 or 3 days of sending the survey out. And this represents every respondent's set of answers. We don't know who answered it. We did not track URLs or emails or anything. We just know 550 staff members responded. And so as you can see on column B, and Rob, if you'll just kind of scroll down so they can see, we had a work session last Thursday where we had 30 people participate in taking this data, reviewing it, and then re-aggregating it by trends. And so wherever you see the one, group one was responsible for those pieces of data, and then all the way through to the bottom. And you can go very quickly, Rob. You don't have to, there you go. You can just see how much data is included, and there's group two and so on. So if you'll go then, Rob, to WS Notes question 1, what we really wanted our team to look at, you can see there's 6 groups. You can see 4 on the screen. You don't necessarily have to show all 6, Rob, but the first lines 2 through 75 were reviewed by group 1, and then so on and so forth, group 2, 3, 4. They took all of the narratives in the responses, these groups in our work session Thursday, and they looked for the trends. So if you look at group 3, for example, on that question, how can we help you feel safe in returning? You can see that people talked about keeping us informed, making sure rooms are sanitized, making sure we don't have perfect attendance, because perfect attendance encourages people to come to work sick or to school sick, so on and so forth. And then if you scroll down, Rob, after each group found the general trends in the data, go up just a little, lines, stop. 24 and 25 are the visions that came from those lines of data. So that same group 2 that we were looking at a minute ago, the trend was that we really need training for parents, students, and staff based on CDC procedures, clear, consistent communication, and district procedures. We also need to make sure supplies and protocols for sanitizing and health checks are in place. So all 6 groups went through the same process. And then if you go down a little further, Rob, you'll see that preferred strategies evolved out of the trends of the data and the visions. We went through that for the question on safety. And then if you go to workbook notes question 2, we went through the same process for ideas for instructional delivery models that keep safety in the forefront of our minds. So how do we stay safe when we return? And then how do we instruct our students and make sure we have learning when we return? And again, you all have access to the share sheet, and I know some of you have been in there reading it. I just wanted to give you a little overview of that process. I don't know if any of our directors want to pop in, because all of them were in the process last week. If any of you want to give your perspective on how Thursday's work session went, well, I'll pause if you want to say something. We're in Zoom. It's a shy world when you have to.
This is Shelley. I thought the process went smoothly. We really were able to get together in small groups and break down those questions and kind of see trends. We were in the yes group. She already had sorted the questions by majority yes open and majority no open. And I was just amazed at the ideas that staff members were able to come up with. They were pretty insightful.
Thank you, Shelley. The color coding that you see where it has parentheses, resources in red or logistics in purple, took the trends that each group found, and then we narrowed those in further, put them through a sieve, if you will, to find common conceptual categories. So you can see that people are really interested in what are the resources, the delivery models, the logistics and how we hold ourselves and our students accountable, what curriculum do we use, and then what professional training or development is necessary. So regardless of the words that were selected or chosen by the respondents, they all did narrow into very similar categories. All right, Mr. Pope, you can take it back to slide 3 of the presentation. So these are the main categories that evolved. Nope. Yep, there you go. These are the main categories that evolved from that workshop session. At the top is clearly safety. Our staff members, and we analyzed the parent surveys as well. Staff and parents want to make sure that KUSD offers clearly defined and consistently followed procedures, and that there are policies that include personal protective equipment, super important, social distancing guidelines, what that looks like when students are back in school, cleanliness protocols, which would include, training, and then what are our plans for possible future closures. So we're really planning for 2 things. 1, the safety of kids returning, and 2, keeping people safe should we have to close again. Another very important piece, and these are not prioritized necessarily, but I would say safety was the #1 key ingredient to our successful plan. Equity is very near the top to safety. How are we going to provide traditional and alternative instructional models based on the unique needs of our students and our staff to ensure that every student has access to high quality education? Because we lived this and felt it and saw it during this last 9 weeks of closure. While we called every family, we made sure the communication was there. We did our very best. Our staffs were amazing. Our administrators led really great school teams. The honest truth is still that it was very difficult for some families to access, much more so than others. And so what can we do to ensure equity? So our team on Thursday, our administrative and school teams and our survey respondents want to make sure that all means all. Every student has access. And what do we need to do to make sure that it is equitable access? Communication, I would say, was the #1 trending response on the parent surveys. And I got to tell you, I want to send a shout out to any of our administrators and any of our staff members who might be viewing this live or in the future. Really an amazing job on the communication. Our parent surveys, which you saw, when we asked the question, gives me goosebumps. When we asked the question, what did KUSD do well during the closures? Line after line after line after line said communication, calling our family, keeping us informed, communication. I think if ever there was a research action project on communication, we conducted it and the results are clear. Communication is key. And in situations where an outlier staff member did not make their calls as often as our expectation required, it showed up in the survey, especially with families who have kids at multiple schools. We heard from X, Y, and Z teacher every week. I really was disappointed I didn't hear from my other child's teacher. So we know communication is important, and that came out on the staff surveys as well. So we will continue to clearly and continuously communicate with all stakeholders regarding their opportunities and the resources that are available for staff, students, and families. Training, I'll give IT a lot of props right now, and Jerry Woolsey and her team in curriculum on the training that happened in that very brief window of time. Even with everything we did, we know going forward that we've got to plan for training. That includes custodial staff training on the optimal products and the best sanitation practices. That means the professional development for online learning. Every piece of it will require an organized system of training. Resources, if we're going to reopen our schools, well, we are going to when we reopen our schools, resources are really key. Aaron has his pulse on this as always. He's an amazing chief financial officer and director. But we know, we don't know what our fiscal resources will be after this year. We know what our budget is for this year. We know we're okay for this year, but reopening schools, if we're going to increase training, personal protective equipment for staff and students, take an online route, that costs money. And so Aaron will be really paying attention to the money that the state says will be available. Superintendent Hoffman told me in that meeting last week, or told all of us, there's $273 million on the table for the state of Arizona. They are working on calculations and funding formulas on how to distribute that money to the districts. We don't know what we're getting or when we're getting it, but we're spending it before we have it, at least in our planning phase. And so Aaron will really pay attention to, what is that money, and is it coming in, and is it a trustworthy resource of finance? And at the same time, he's working on some side plans. If the money doesn't meet our needs that comes from the state, what can we do as a district? Because a lot of what you'll see today or hear today requires some level of funding. And then finally, it was loud and clear from our staff that we need some accountability systems. Again, we're not judging what we just went through. We did an amazing job. I think our principals and our staff did a great job. But going forward, what are our clear expectations and our accountability systems so that we can monitor all of the educational and the safety systems to make sure they are working? We don't want to tell you we have a safety plan. We want to show you and then give you data that we are actually following through on our safety plan. So if anybody ever says to a board member, hey, KUSD says they're doing this, are they really? Then you will have data, real-time data. We're going to continue to do everything in these live share sheets to see that it's happening. Any questions on those categories or comments? Okay, Rob, next. We're going to spend a little bit of time on a couple of CDC sites that Rob will take us to, but before he does that, there's a lot of stuff out there on social media and on the web about what should happen when schools open, and what should districts do, and if you're being safe, are you following these guidelines, and these things are musts. Well, when we take a look at the CDC recommendations for school openings, they are just that, recommendations, and it says throughout the documents, when feasible, if allowable. Basically, it's giving us a parameter that says this is the most safe and the most optimal environment in which to have children. Of course, we want to follow that. But there's one, like keeping desks 6 feet apart. I see that a lot in conversations on social media. We can't come back to school until desks are 6 feet apart. Well, that's not necessarily true. One of the recommendations, for example, on that bullet point 2, physical layout of classroom, making sure desks are spaced, 6 feet would be optimal. Having them facing forward, and if you can't have 6 feet, that's why there's an asterisk, then maybe plexi dividers on the, if they're only 4 feet apart from student to student, not desk edge to desk edge, but student to student. Maybe you have a plexi divider, or you have some other system that mitigates that risk or the airborne particles. So things that we have to talk about at a group today, if we know we can't have desks 6 feet apart, it's not possible. Or let's stop saying desks, people 6 feet apart, right? If we can't have people 6 feet apart, then what are ways to get them 6 feet apart? Is that by reducing numbers, or are there other pieces that we can add to make sure that that safety barrier is there? So our teams will be looking at obviously busing, because there's a lot of kids on KUSD buses. That's a very large item to be looking at. How do we screen them getting onto the bus? What's the procedure if someone tries to get on the bus? Jerry Woolsey's looking at a lot of different ideas for, we talked in our workshop, can we have a temperature check as students are entering the bus, right? And then you can get on the bus if your temperature's in the normal range, and you can't if it's not. But when you have a very tight bus system and kids have to pile on the bus, is there time to stop with the forehead thermometer between each child, or what are some other options? So she's working on that, and communication posters. I won't read all of this to you, but you can see all of the areas that we're working on that we pulled from the CDC. So Rob, first, go to the link on the left.
Okay, give me
The
1 second
decision
here.
tree.
Hold on 1 second.
Put a hand up if I'm saying too much or going too fast. Look, Ivan. We can do.
You're doing great.
Make a TikTok video. There's one that's like, I don't,
Okay, can you see that?
all right. So this is a pretty common flowchart that's being used right now, and it's simple, but it's profound, you know, in the concept behind it. So will reopening be consistent with applicable state and local orders? What Superintendent Hoffman told me in our meeting a couple of weeks ago was that it's a school board decision whether the school in in whatever district the school board governs opens or not. That the only way schools can close is by the governor and in some cases the health department. So we are allowed to vote. You are allowed to vote as a board when to reopen at this point, unless something happens and the governor steps in, which she did not expect. So yes, we would only reopen consistent with applicable state and local orders and board approval. Is the school ready to protect children and employees at high risk for severe illness? You'll see in a little while when we talk about our plans that that's exactly what we're planning for. How can we reduce numbers, have a process or have an educational system available for our at-risk population? So we're definitely planning for that right now. Are we able to screen students and employees upon arrival? And Vicki Trujillo's really been working on this. She's got a lot going into her planning system because she works with our health, I always forget the title, our district nurse. They have been ordering some of the forehead thermometers in multiple, and so that there are several people can be, you know, screening people on the way through the door. So yes, we're looking at systems for screening. Wow, it grew. Thanks, Rob. Systems for screening upon arrival. And then what is our process should somebody not pass our screening process? You know, do we isolate them? And then what happens after that? So I can say, yes, we will have a plan for that. So we can go to the right. Are we going to promote healthy hygiene practices? Absolutely. We are ordering, you know, the hospital has the sanitation or sanitizer stations that are on a stand and you just put your hand under it. Every classroom will have sanitizer and every school will have those sanitation stations at entry points. Again, depending on the procurement process, Erin's team is working on that, and Donette will let us know the availability. If it's not available and we cannot do that, then we would definitely inform you and say our answer is no if the resources and products are not available. But we're on it. We've got it in our plan, and procurement is working on it. One of the topics that was discussed last Thursday in several of our groups was the face coverings. That's where there's a whole variety of perspectives in the community. If you go out in Kingman right now, there's one face mask for every 100 people, right? We're seeing it. People are sort of voting with their faces, if you will. We're seeing faces versus masks. And so there are staff members and parents on both sides of this conversation. You can't make me and I won't. And everybody should, and you should make them. That's going to be a really tough piece to navigate. And again, in the CDC recommendations, and we'll look at the other link in a minute, it's when feasible and when doable. And I don't think there are any laws at this point where we have to say, you know, you will. As a board, I suppose the board could come back and say a board policy is during a pandemic to be at school, you must wear a mask. I would say that's a pretty big conversation decision there. Will we have them available? Yes. Will we allow them? Absolutely. Will we encourage them? Certainly. The intense cleaning and disinfecting and ventilation piece, definitely working on. We've got the cleaning going. We're talking to some experts doing our research on ventilation. Schools like Wallapai, Surbat, Black Mountain, a lot of our schools don't have good venting. A couple of you who were teachers in the schools, you know, you go into your classroom, there's no open window, there's no ventilation, you're just sort of in a petri dish box. So what kind of filters can we put in our air system, and can we purchase a HEPA filter air purifier for every classroom? And there is a lot of research on it. One of you sent me an article. Who was that? Vicki, was that you? Do you remember what the article said about it? It talked about it in the positive.
Right. It said a little bit about how it helps catch the particles, so it is beneficial.
And did it also say that they were using them in the rooms of quarantined COVID patients? While it won't keep the COVID patient, obviously, from getting it because they already have it, it does protect caregivers a little bit.
Right.
And so we would have it in a room where we don't have COVID positive people, obviously. We would have non-COVID positive. But it would be just a way of circulating air and putting it through a filter for those kids and that staff member in the room. So we are looking at ventilation.
Yeah, I remember at Wallapai, it was kind of a running joke with my students, but where the filter is in the classroom, it was so disgusting, and there was no way that was getting any airflow. And
Right.
it made sense. I mean, my air conditioner blew twice while I was in that room.
Yeah.
But as far as COVID positive patients, they're actually in isolation rooms, and they're venting it out the window.
Right. Yeah, that's the optimal. That's what they want. You have to open windows. But if you can't, they're saying this is not like an open window, but it is a nice addition rather than nothing. The social distancing piece, definitely looking at how to space, have small groups, avoid, on the last slide, communally open areas. We've talked a little bit about recess, right? We can have directional hallways, we can space tables in cafeterias, we can stagger times, we can reduce group numbers, we can avoid assemblies. We can really work on that social distancing, and then we're going to have a team that actually focuses on recess. You know, do we close like the parks did? Caution tape equipment where kids might congregate. Will everybody sanitize on their way off the playground and into the school? We have to keep the psychological factor for teachers and students in mind as well. Any of us that have been teachers, a number of us in this group today, you don't want 6 months of a rainy day schedule kind of thing where you're eating in the classroom and recessing in the classroom. That's just not psychologically healthy. So how can we give them some space and keep safe? That's part of what we're working on, and give the teacher a break at the same time. And then, of course, the training that we talked about earlier, all employees on these processes. So we are working on meeting these safeguards, and I'm pretty confident we will meet all of them. Pretty doable column. And so if we can go yes to the next one, then we need our monitoring. Screening and monitoring was a very common trend during our data workshop last Thursday. We don't want to just say, yay, we're open. It has to be a continual effort on that coming in the door screening. What is our new visitor policy? You know, we don't want people coming in and out of the building. Where will where will our safeguards be? Again, just a very simple thing, but there are no perfect attendance policy for staff or students. Encouraging people to stay home, having those flexible attendance policies for the adults and for the students, and that constant communication, and then monitoring the health, the numbers and the risk at a community level. So that ongoing, I mentioned monitoring and accountability system. So if yes to all of those, then open and monitor. So that's the process, dear board members, that we're working on right now and we'll need you to help with. All right. And anybody can make comments while Rob is switching to the other link. Go ahead and switch it out, Rob.
I had a question, more of just a thought, if we could include some kind of classrooms outside. I know it's going to be pretty hot in the beginning of the year, but you know, if we were to designate areas that belong to different teachers and they could start to create classrooms that they could go back and forth, might also mitigate some of that being stuck in that one room.
Thank you, Beth. I wrote that down. Thank you so much. But that also makes me think, hearing you speak, that you could sort of do a similar thing on recess. I'll add that to our recess team. If there are designated sections, and that sort of reduces the chaos where they're everywhere and you don't know where they are, that would be an excellent strategy. Okay, Mr. Pope, this is the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's consideration for schools, last updated, as you can see, on May 19th of 2020. If you'll just slowly scroll down just a little bit. The guiding principles, obviously the lowest risk are for students and teachers to engage in virtual classes, activities, and events only. That's where we've been the last 9 weeks in school closures at this lowest risk level. You have to always know at the lowest risk for exposure correlates with the highest risk for reduced learning and forward progress. And so clearly we made the best decision to go to the lowest risk while the pandemic was evolving and growing. But that lowest risk is not necessarily the best idea going forward for education. So this is what we're doing today, is finding out when do we shift from which category to the next. You add a little bit of risk when you have in-person class and events and activities. You have a little bit more risk when students are staying together with the same teacher. But you can minimize it, like we talked about earlier, by spacing, by having procedures for no shared objects, for having personal protective gear available, for teaching our kids and staff, how to do school a little differently. We've been encouraging collaboration in our schools for a year. If you're looking at the science of learning, brains are collaborative. Brains require collaboration in many cases to learn. So how can we collaborate and not be huddled in little groups or in groups around the room? So more risk, and yet we have some strategies we can put into place to minimize the risk. Clearly, the highest risk is just kind of totally jumping back in as normal. Full-sized, in-person, everything the same. Don't worry about spacing. Just go back to what you were doing. We will not take the higher risk route. We would like to take, that middle route and have some kids on our campuses and just make sure we do it very safely. All right, Rob. And we're not going to read through this entire thing, board members. I just wanted you to see the link, and you have the presentation, and you can go back in, later if you want, because we're not necessarily going to make big decisions today. You can go in later and do some of your own. Whoa, it's moving reading. And bring it back open. Nope. Can you reopen it, Rob? Although that is a lovely turtle or tortoise. Okay, so the guiding principles, we're just going to slide down this page a little bit below the guiding principles into the promoting behaviors that reduce spread, right? So that staying home when appropriate is huge. That's what we're really going to work on. That's the screening. And if you're at risk, super at risk, or if you're sick, stay home. We'll keep the hygiene and respiratory etiquette going. We'll have everybody trained and a monitoring and accountability system. We talked about the face cloth coverings. You can keep scrolling, Rob. The adequate supplies piece, that's what I talked about earlier with Aaron and his procurement group. What's available and can we get it? And let's order it now. Jerry's team is working on signs and messages. I think Shelly, Vicki, you, Jerry, that whole area, you guys are working on signs and announcements. We will keep our communication resources available. We've got our teams. Donnie Favor at our warehouse is doing an excellent job staying in contact with vendors, and he's been working with our custodians. He's actually setting up some trainings for cleaning and some monitoring system. Keep going, Rob. The shared objects, we talked about ventilation, watering systems. We'll make sure that our watering systems are good to go. I don't think that's a big problem in KUSD, but I thought it was interesting that everything's been sitting. So as we start moving forward, we'll need to make sure we get those systems running. We're really looking at physical barriers and guides. It talks about, you know, when kids are in the restroom and they walk up to the sinks, is there a barrier between them? All the details that are super important. And then in classrooms, are the barriers available? Talked about the communal spaces. Aaron and Jerry will work with our food service on what food distribution looks like during a lunchtime, versus having all the open food, you know, doing it the traditional way. Will we continue it more in a manner that we've been doing in the last 9 weeks, where things are prepackaged and bagged? And then the guide goes on and talks about maintaining healthy operations and small groups and staggered schedules and making sure that we're aware of regulations and so on. So this is a main resource that we used when we looked at our data and to start our planning teams. All right, you can go back to the PowerPoint, Rob, because we want to get to the, there we go. Next slide. All right, so here's some information. Mrs. Woolsey and her team worked on putting together some calendar ideas. So we have our July 22nd calendar, which is the already approved calendar. We talked in our workshop last week about an August 3rd calendar, which is 6 school days, not counting weekends or Fridays, 6 school days delayed. August 17th is 14 school days delayed, and September 1st is 25 school days delayed. But if you look above it, my airline stewardess, if you look above, you will see how many school days since our students last had direct instruction. A teacher interacting with the students engaged in new learning. 78.
The email that Jerry sent out earlier also had a September 14th.
Oh,
after
yeah.
Labor Day.
Yeah. Which hopefully is, yeah. That's in the worst case scenario, September 14th. Because you can see September 1st, that's 103 school days since students last received direct instruction. A school year is 144 school days. That's, by September 1st, they will have lost a great majority of a school year. Just information for all of us to have. All of the options outside of the July 22nd might require additional ADE approval of flexible seat time, not necessarily the calendar piece, but the instructional delivery piece. So you can see the payroll piece underneath, July 22nd, normal payroll, everybody reports to work, holidays and breaks are the same. August 3rd, normal for teachers, delayed for classified. We have to reduce October. By the 17th, we remove the October break. We definitely have delayed payroll for classified, but we can still have normal payroll for teachers because the end day is the same. On September 1st, then no October, no spring break. We may have to add a Friday a month if we want to end at a similar time or complete school in June. And then definitely a delayed payroll for 3 of our groups. And then we're going to go into those lower pieces here in a minute. For today's purpose, vocabulary-wise, traditional would mean all kids every day. Whether they were online or in person, traditional is all kids every day. Alternate will mean 2 on and 2 off, whether it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday. So traditional is every kid every day, and alternate is part-time in the school, part-time at home. Okay, Rob.
Hey, Dr. Dorner, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Can you go back to that slide?
Yep, go back, Rob.
Go over the hybrid again. So 2 days on, 2 days off, the 2 days off, the students receiving online curriculum or no?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to tell you about next.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I'll explain this slide. I'm going to take it and now piece it into very detailed pieces.
Okay.
Yep, no worries. So a traditional choice. So traditional is every student every day, and choice means live seat time or online. So the second level of that chart, you're going to choose traditional, go to school every day, or be an online student. So we anticipate, and that's an anticipated number, the call out, 70 to 80% we're about 67% of our parents said they want to come back and they want to be in school and they're not interested in online. So I think by the time we open school in late July or sometime in August, that would increase, keeping things the same health-wise in the community. So the goal is to reduce the average number of students in class, because that can then give us the space to minimize exposure and to give options to vulnerable students and families. The risk, you have to always look at the risk with every model, is inconsistent learning due to decreased live monitoring. We all know, and we especially learned this in the last 9 weeks, that an online school system can work if there's a high engagement with the teacher. We can't just, in my opinion, based on research and our recent experience, say, you're online, get on at your leisure and do your lessons. For KUSD, our recommendation for online is you get in your class on a bell schedule, but you're online. I think if we say at your leisure, we start losing the control and accountability in that interaction with the teacher and instruction. So that risk, we would mitigate that risk by putting procedures into place to reduce the risk. If it's inconsistent learning due to decreased live monitoring and a lack of equitable resources by family, then what do we do to make that risk, to reduce that risk? So
I have a question.
Yep, go right ahead.
I was visioning that if each class was live streaming,
Yep.
then students could be counted in their seat because they're interacting online at the same time as the rest of the class.
Right.
Wouldn't ADM agree with that?
We don't know. That's part of what we're waiting to see. If you have an AOI, an online, if you're credentialed or approved by the State Board of Education to be an online provider, then absolutely. But we are not currently an online provider. Now, Jerry was telling me that they had a team in 2012 that started the online process, and they made it through the first phase of it, but we are not an accredited or online provider. So at this point, and we do plan to go through that process, but at this point, we need the state to approve flexible seat time. We need to get credit for kids who are at home receiving it via live stream or online delivery.
And the likelihood that is going to be feasible for families is not good if they have more than one child. If you're doing a bell time and they all have to have a computer with a different teacher.
Yep, I know.
Yeah, that's not going to work.
It's going to be difficult.
It's going to be very difficult, but I mean, that's part of what our team needs to really talk about and plan for. You can see under the online, part of what we want to maybe look at for families who don't have computers, or they might have multiple kids, or it won't work in their home. Maybe some people can just jump online and they're good to go at home. Those families do exist. But we also maybe can provide KUSD online centers where a handful of students can be in a room with the guards on the computer with the resources and the bandwidth, and still be doing the online. That removes them from the general population. There wouldn't be lunches or recess. It would reduce their day. There's a lot of things we can do to increase their ability to be online with multiple kiddos. We're talking about what one-to-one technology can we distribute, working with our internet providers to see where we can put hotspots. There's a ton that's going to go into that red line, or that red pathway.
Christian, are you going to talk about specials?
No, I wasn't planning on it, but we can. They did discuss it on Thursday, how difficult specials would be, having those kids roll through in large groups, those special teachers all day. If you have thoughts and ideas on it, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, well, my biggest concern was, well, all of them actually, if you think about it. Music, musical instruments, you're projecting that, computers, the constant touching of the same material, PE, exercise, increased respiration. So in general, specials sound like they would be a difficult thing to do. And then, you know, doing the split days or the online, how do we provide specials education, not special education, specials education to our online students? So that seems to be a difficult hurdle if we're going to be.
Absolutely. It's on the burner. Yeah. It's a tough one. Could keep the kids and the specials teachers safe and provide a well-rounded education at the same time. Yep. That's one of our task team big ones right now. For another very important piece that we talked about for people who, what we had a little bit of trouble with during the closure piece was people would sign up for online. Oh, I heard packets are easier. I'm switching to packets, or vice versa. So to have a system of accountability and a structure that doesn't rock the boat too much. If you choose traditional, you're traditional, unless you're approved online for a reason, a health reason, a risk reason, a real reason, not I'm tired of coming to school, I'd rather be online. Or if you go to online, you're online. You can't switch back to traditional. We can't be having massive movement. We need to save any movement we have for the people who need the movement. And so that's a piece. So if you see, everything kind of comes back to training, logistics, communication, and then there's always SPED consideration. Vicki has an entire presentation. She has worked so hard and put in so many hours on what does this look like for our special ed kiddos. That always has to be considered. So this is one model. There's a couple more coming. This is traditional choice. Every kid, every day, you're either in school or you're online. If you're online, you might be at home online or in a center online. But whatever pathway you choose, unless health or other factors make it a necessity, you stay in that line. The yellow across the bottom are the safety, equitability, communication, training, resource, and accountability pieces we talked about earlier, those trends that came out of our workshop. At the very bottom, that should be read as risks. So the little dashes are negatives. What are the risks when it comes to safety in a traditional choice model? So the risk is that we've reduced numbers, but it's not minimal. So you do still have a risk of social interaction. A risk is that there's less time for cleaning because the buildings are occupied, so we may have to adjust. And for every risk, then we come up with a strategy. A risk doesn't mean we can't do it, because a risk means let's recognize this could be a problem and then put a strategy into place. So a risk is less time for cleaning, and a risk is hard to avoid all contact. And so we would have to definitely have procedures in place. The equitable access one is tough. Not all kids, not all families would qualify for online because you're going to have devices and internet. So we either have to figure out a funding source or a way to provide devices and internet for everyone, or maybe traditional, maybe we can, and we don't want to be discriminatory in any way. So you have to look at this from every vantage point. Only people who qualify for online, we've gotten them internet, we have them devices, and they have the ability to do it, should be online, but that is a risk. Communication, all perspectives are not aligned. I think you're going to find this risk in every model, right? There's going to be a lot of people applauding this model and saying, go for it. And then there's going to be those people who say, this is absolutely terrible model, not a good idea, not the best model. So the communication will be key with whatever we decide as a district to get buy-in. Training in this model is time prohibitive. There's not a lot of time. And we have to really pay attention to the teacher's time. That's important to point out right now. If you are a classroom teacher and you have a set of traditional kids in your room, every kid every day, whatever number that is, you cannot also be the online teacher. Now, Beth, you could live stream it, but imagine, did we lose Beth? I went to look at Beth and her face is gone. We can't expect our teachers to be the traditional teacher and the online teacher. That is not, that That is not doable for the majority. There are a few staff members, Ron Bear, who would say, let me do them all. But for most staff members, I'm going to be the traditional teacher because that's going to require planning, emotional investment, monitoring. That's going to be a high level of monitoring. Don't touch, don't mix, don't mingle, let's clean, all of those things. And then to imagine paying attention to the online streaming and giving them that same due diligence and energy can't happen. Our group, and we had teachers in our group last Thursday as well, talked a lot about that. So if you're a traditional teacher, you're a traditional teacher. If you're an online teacher, you're an online teacher. And so we may have to re-look at our staffs, and that'll depend on, the numbers. If there's a few hundred third graders in KUSD and 30 of them want online third grade, we can't just take one of the third grade teachers, because mathematically, you pull the teacher out to do the online, you just upped the numbers right in the live classes. So we're going to have to just really look at, and this is where we need the state's money to come in. Do we need to add some online folks and traditional to reduce the numbers? And that gets very expensive. A lot of people say, we should do this, do this, do this, do this, but every do this, and Aaron should be raising his hand saying, go tell them, every do this has a dollar sign with it. And so we have to look at our current budget and then the resources the state might give us and make the most doable decision. So I just wanted to give that little sidebar on the online and the traditional. So any teachers watching aren't having an elevated blood pressure thinking, I have to do both. No, we do not expect people to do both. All right. On the resources, we talked about how it's a risk, it's state dependent. It will not be a sustained money source. And we have to be really careful to watch if our needs exceed the available dollars. So those are all risks to pay attention to. And then finally, its accountability may increase stress. It will increase stress, I have no doubt. It's going to be difficult to manage, so we're going to have systems in place. And again, as with the communication piece, there's going to be a lot of varied perspectives to take into account. And our mantra at KUSD, among these wonderful faces you're looking at on your Zoom screen, has been every perspective matters, every voice matters, everybody's fear is valid, and we try really hard not to have any judgment, just to make sure we have everybody's perspective. Because we talked on Thursday that sometimes what one of us might find an odd perspective, if you really listen with an open heart and open mind, the best idea comes out of that perspective. And so it's almost like a domino effect. I'm going to listen to your perspective, hear what you have to say, truly wrap my head around what you're saying, and then take what you're saying and see if it fits into what we're doing. And it really does most often. All right. I'm going to go through a couple more of these, and then we can back up and talk about all of them in more detail. Mr. Pope, next one. Okay, alternate days. So this model is a model to significantly reduce the number of students in a class in order to mitigate exposure through distancing. Alternate days can be a Monday, Wednesday, or a Tuesday, Thursday. One of our workshop participants suggested Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, Thursday to keep the days together. That would lead into 2 days of live direct instruction and 2 days of at-home independent practice. You notice I did not use the term online because it's every student coming on those 2 days. We could add a third branch and then have the online too, but just for planning and brain resource purposes, we're kind of keeping it clean at this point. If you're there for 2 days of live instruction and 2 days of independent practice, or in some cases, having kids there for 4 days if they qualify. So most students would be 2 days of live and 2 days of independent. But some students, maybe in the special ed programs that Vicky's overseeing, or the EL or others that have a higher requirement of seat time, may qualify for being there for 4 days. And that was sort of exciting. I mean, you hope that not so many qualify, that your numbers are back up. Why do it? But if some are there for 4 days, they would really benefit from that double direct instruction, right? Some students, and research says if you're at a tier 2 or a tier 3 level, tier 1 kids can have direct instruction and interact with their teachers and then independently practice. But tier 2 and tier 3 students need a revisit or a reteach. Maybe that can be provided in this model. But the idea would be to have live instruction, direct instruction, guided practice and interaction with the teacher, and then independent practice at home.
What does, can I jump in?
Yep, absolutely.
What does curriculum look like? Because I know that when I was teaching those, and this was when I was teaching, we had 5 days in the week.
Yeah.
And it was hammer, hammer, hammer every single 5 days. What does curriculum look like when you're truly only having new material 2 days? And then are we foregoing some subjects that aren't tested?
Yes and yes. And again, these are the beginning stages models. The idea is that once we make some decisions on let's explore these models more, then we really will get into the nuts and the bolts. But the preliminary conversation about that was it's going to be the power standards or the essential standards, and there's going to be some culling. There's no way, and you see that on the risks too. There's no way that you can get it all in every day. And then, you look at your summative exams down the road. We've already lost 100 or 78 to 100 days of instruction. What are all the gaps? It's going to be crisis education 2.0. We just came out of crisis education. This will be the next stage of crisis education, but hopefully, we get the basics in. Jen is the best answer I can give you. There's going to be a lot cut out. We're going to have to be a lot more efficient. And then we all know that those 2 days of independent practice at home, we really struggle in society, not just Kingman, all of society, with kiddos having the motivation or the support or the desire to actually have that quality practice independently at home. We would have to expect that our 2 days of live instruction would end with 2 days of in some cases, very high quality work. Some students and some families are there and they have it. But our at-risk kids may not have quality independent practice at home. So that's definitely, if you see the risk piece there, we've got a learning gap due to time constraints. That would be huge.
Can I interject something?
Yep.
I'm really concerned about this option. I think that number one, we're looking at the community needing one of the big things I've talked about on the news. The parents need the kids in school in order to open the economy and go to work. So just 2 days a week is not going to suffice for that.
Yep. We're just presenting what came through on the surveys. We just organized it. Yep.
Right. And then the other thing is, if you're seeing the same kids for the 2 days, it's not going to matter health-wise if you see them for the 4.
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely a conversation. You reduce the numbers in that they can be spread out. That's a positive. But if you look at the risks below each of our categories, have reduced numbers and a little more time for cleaning, yes, on the safety piece. But then the equitable access piece becomes a problem because they will have minimal assistance. There's not going to be anybody there with them while they're doing their independent practice. They may be in an at-risk environment at home, Beth. That was one of our, that one really makes me nervous. Just keeping it real, we have a lot of great families and great support systems for a lot of our kids, but some kids don't have parents or guardians that can provide that same support system at home. So that is a risk. Students often need a live teacher, even if it's a live streaming teacher. They need a live teacher to have confidence to independently practice. And if you think about it, one absence in a 2-day week equals 50% loss of instruction. I can predict for you that this would be a very big problem because we thought going from 5 days to 4 days would increase attendance. It did not, right? People are absent just as frequently on a 4-day week as they were on a 5-day week. It's just a fact. We have over 20% of our students. I did this research last fall before the pandemic because we were working on our attendance goals. Most of our schools have more than 20% of their kids are chronically absent, which means more than 10% of the time. So those same chronically absent kids will now be chronically absent in a 2-day model, and they're down to 25% of their instruction. So that's where I said earlier, you got to say, sure, it reduces the numbers, but what risk replaces the reduction in numbers? All right. Again, a lot of the same risks on resources. I think the accountability piece, a 2-day model, that middle one, is definitely difficult to manage, and there are varied perspectives on this as well. So I said upwards of 70% of our families are ready to come back to school. If we were to sell an alternate day model, everything Beth just said and so many more reasons, our varied perspectives would be on the smaller side of the scale. But there it is. All right, Rob. Now, and there can be variations of those two models. That's just a starting point for y'all to think about. You can add or detract or make recommendations on anything that we've presented so far. We have to be prepared in case there's a surge in COVID cases and the governor or the health department tells us, yeah, we're going to have to go back to a closure. People are calling it rolling closures, intermittent closures, a resurge closure, whatever term of closure you want to give it. What if it happens? And I will tell you, I give our district, our board, our families, our teachers, our administrators an A+ and a blue ribbon for the last 9 weeks. I truly do. But I think we would all agree that those two things on your screen were missing in the last 2 weeks. And that is new learning and accountability. And that accountability is accountability for new learning. I don't mean accountability for where were staff members and what were they doing. That part was great. It's new learning and accountability for that learning. We did not have any new learning during the closures. There wasn't time or training or resources or anything available to say, here's our new model and you can now teach in this new way. It was revisiting standards that had been taught in many cases and enrichment and wonderful things, but not a lot of new learning. So we also, at the same time that we're trying to figure out a new model to open our schools with, a new calendar and a new model, is what happens if we close. And so our goal is to have 100% of our faculty and students prepared to launch. I say exclusively, but I should change that to primary, because you'll see when I change the slide, it's really not 100% exclusively digital. But packets don't work. That's just the bottom line. The packets don't work if we're closed. Homework packets might work. Again, we talked about that with solid teaching, strong teaching, relationships with the teacher, motivation. But in a school closure, packets don't work. So we need another workshop to talk about this. But on the next slide, Rob, it kind of shows you my vision is that we would have to be online with maybe some components of traditional for qualifying special education programs for students. For example, our preschool remained open. Julie Byer and her entire staff did an incredible job. Preschool wasn't open. The daycare portion of preschool was open, but they were there every day interacting with the kids. They were almost a pilot program. And Julie Byer, if you're watching, thank you and your staff so much for what we could look like in the rest of the schools. They are the trailblazers and the leaders. They showed us what it looks like to screen kids when they come to school. They showed us what it looked like to interact with your kids but have safety measures in place, and it went very well. So that's that traditional school for some qualifying programs would be available. But we need to have a KUSD online center, a home online, and maybe some online qualified centers like I talked about earlier, but totally digital and live stream and interactive. That's, to me, the only option. And of course, we would take the unique needs of every learner into case, and we would talk about those as it arises. But this is what we will plan for. So I know Rob has been working on this a little bit all along. You know, what digital resources do we have now? What do we need? We surveyed our families. Remember that first week of the closures, so we kind of know where our needs are as far as who needs what devices. We know who has internet and who doesn't. What we don't know is what is the money the state would give us to help increase digital access, and then what does the training look like so all staff are comfortable, and then what does the actual delivery model look like. I hear what you said earlier, Jen. I think that's a huge obstacle. Like every kid in the home, like they're in a classroom, following a bell schedule every day might be really difficult. But how can we increase that accountability and that face-to-face process in that online forehand so teachers can instruct and there is learning and there is day-to-day interaction, and what is the accountability? So we'll work on an reopening plan, but we're also going to work on a reclosing plan all at the same time. Our work is cut out for us. You can see, obviously, and we talked about the CDC recommendations earlier, this is the most minimal risk if we're all completely online. But we are lacking technology. And Mr. Pope talks about our firewall. It's a super important piece. And Rob, I want you to share that with the board members if you don't mind popping your voice into the conversation here.
Yeah, no, for sure. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, the web filter is kind of one of the things that we're concerned about when we send devices home. So if that be that Chromebooks or whatever, we don't currently have a proper way to filter those devices when we send them home to what content the students are seeing, and so that can run us into SIPA compliance as far as protecting those students with our devices at home. So that's one of those things that we have to work on with that web filter and deploy that out to make sure that we're protecting those students.
Rob, while I have you on, do you want to give us, just from the top of your head, I'm putting him on the spot right now, a general overview of where you feel we are as a district based on your early research with devices and internet access?
Yeah, so I think devices, so as Dr. Dorner mentioned, there are a couple different avenues from the state that we are waiting on through funding that could definitely change this narrative. But where we are with devices is we kind of are looking at maybe about 20%, I think, probably don't have devices at home. And that range is about the same for internet connection as well.
And Rob, that would be, we're guessing now because we didn't ask how many devices they have, right, but we would do a much more exhaustive survey and one-on-one research interview. A device in a home with up to, who knows, 3, 4, 5, 6 kids.
Yes.
So
yep.
To go to a closure online model, we would have to know how many devices they need based on the number of students, and then what's the feasibility going from there with like bandwidth and internet. Because I know on our first few days of Schoology and Google Classroom, we took a lot of calls, did we not, Rob, at the help desk and here at the DO about crashing? And yes. I think it was internet overload. And didn't you, and share, Rob, what you were told about, they had bandwidth planned for 10 years, but we were already using it?
Ooh, you might have to remind me on that one. I'm not.
It seems like the internet providers were saying they had the capacity to service X number of people, and they thought they were ready for years ahead. But because of the closure and the increase in internet usage, they were at capacity. Maybe I had that conversation with a different person.
Yeah, possibly.
Okay. So we would definitely need to meet. And I met with Dr. Klippenstein from Mojave Community College. We had a fantastic, just a one-on-one virtual meeting recently where we shared some of the same concerns. And he and I and some other educational leaders are going to set up a meeting with internet providers to talk about, where are we and what's your capability, and because we could become like a major contributor to internet usage, obviously, if we had this direction. So we would get Rob and our friends at MCC and anybody else that's uses Suddenlink as a provider to have them folded into our planning process, because we could come up with this amazing online center. We could apply for our AOI again and be approved and get all of the devices, and then we don't want to hear from our internet providers that we can't do this. So we'll make sure to include them in the conversation.
Yeah, sure enough, I can interject real quick, Dr. Dorner. So she mentioned MCC. So Mark Van Pelt and I are working through a couple different things just to kind of update the board a little bit on that. But the CARE Act is kind of one of the things that the MCC and I are talking about, as well as AZ Strut, which is a foundation to possibly get devices from. So just a real quick overview of that. We're just looking at those options to see what we can do as far as internet bandwidth and devices to students.
Thank you.
I have a question. Hello?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, on bandwidth. That concerns me quite a bit too, because it's very expensive. But in our present condition, are we using fiber?
Yes, ma'am. So in the district, we are using fiber. We have a 10 gig uplink. So our bandwidth in district is really good, hardwired. It's when you start having people remotely start using, of course, I think is where the internet providers were having issues.
Okay. And our internet provider is who?
Currently, we are using Suddenlink. And then also
Okay.
Frontier for Mount Tipton. Frontier is the only one that can actually reach out to Tipton.
Okay. I would think Frontier would have a larger capacity for bandwidth.
Yeah. And again, I'm not sure on that conversation that with those providers. So yeah, I'm not sure what problems they were running into when it came to getting people online.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll just interject out here in Sohi on the way to Dolan. We have been maxed with Frontier, and we can only get Frontier other than satellite. We've been maxed at 6 forever. They have no way to increase our bandwidth or our speed.
Okay. So
I think Dr. Dorner was Aaron had a comment or a question. Did he get to ask it?
Can I ask that question, please?
Yeah.
Robbie, is there a way that, I know it'll probably increase the bandwidth and switch the problem over, but does our remote access, if students have to log into remote access, does that do away with the web filter issue? Essentially, if all their work is on our server anyway?
Unfortunately, no. I mean, okay, yeah, twofold, I guess. Yes, it would, but getting everyone to have that remote access would be extremely difficult with the devices that they're using, as well as the amount of students that we'd be talking about.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask each director who's with us today to just share the number one thoughts on their mind right now. So I'll start with Vicki. When you think special ed and special ed services, what would you like us to know and to consider as we talk about these kinds of models?
As we talk about all the different models, the one thing I want us to consider is through this pandemic, we have received no waivers in the IDEA and the IDEA timelines. So for example, we have over 100 evaluations that if we don't have our psychologists come back in July to perform on students, we'll have over 100 evaluations out of compliance. The Department of Education said, hey, for this last quarter, don't worry about it. We won't pull those files in an audit. but we are out of compliance because we haven't been able to evaluate. Additionally, students who fall back and regress during this time, we have to pay compensatory services too. Just this weekend alone, we have 2 families who are already emailing saying, hey, my student's falling behind. We need to go ahead and get those compensatory services. If we're not providing those services, it just snowballs and those expenses get bigger. And then additionally, we saw out of Pennsylvania, their school district was sued for failure to provide services to students with severe eligibilities during the pandemic.
So is it your recommendation, Mrs. Trujillo, that, and that's kind of why I put special ed considerations at the bottom of each model, that we get our services, our service providers, and our special ed kiddos back as quickly as possible?
Yes, that is my recommendation, that we get them back as quick as possible. The thought of them going 103 days with no services can really impact those compensatory services, which will add a great deal of expenses on the back end.
So even if we decided as a district to go with the 3rd, the 17th, or the 1st, you would like to see them coming back in July, kind of like the preschool did at the regular time?
Correct. We'd like to see the special ed kids, especially those in the district self-contained program, to return to school on July 22nd. They have the greatest need for services, and by bringing these students back, not only would we be able to provide services, we can start training some of these students in the safety precautions they'll need to take when the other students return.
And did you survey your special education families, and what data do you have for that?
We did not survey all the families, but we did survey the self-contained teachers. Right. And off the top of my head, about 60% of them had no problem coming back. I did talk to 4 of the principals on their building, and they thought it was a good idea to bring those populations back earlier, and they could run on an alternate calendar. So those students who would come back on July 22nd would just follow the calendar we currently have adopted. We did look into providing services outside of the start of the school, and we figured out, we worked with Michelle Stout, and it was almost $250,000 just to work with these kids, like in an extended school year program before everyone else returned. So that's why we came up with the alternative track calendars.
So if we were to start later and not have fall break, those students would have fall break?
Yes.
So the number of days worked by staff would be the same, just on a different calendar?
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure to give you the chance to say anything you wanted to say regarding special ed. Anything else?
No, it's really important if we can get them to start, because I don't know where we're going to find the people to provide the services, because we will have to hire additional staff, because our current staff cannot do all the compensatory services in addition to maintaining our current services.
Thanks, Vicki.
Thanks.
Shelley, do you want to talk about some of the things you're facing, you and Lisa?
Just recently, within the last few weeks, we've been given our guidance from ADE about the new regulations for EL students and their service minutes, and how that is going to look different next year. They need to have, at an elementary level, 300 minutes per week of targeted instruction where they're meeting specifically just with EL only, and 300 minutes of integrated with their other general ed students within their grade level. So we're looking, we're waiting for guidance. I reached out to what would the different models look like in our requirements and meeting those minutes. I haven't gotten back from, heard back from them yet. But one we have heard is we have to look at our assessment situation with our Title I, and that would be our schools of improvement within our CSI, our comprehensive school of improvement and targeted, that have those targeted groups such as our EL students and SPED students. We have to present information based on our benchmarks, and we're looking at what would a assessment look like in an online compared to a traditional face-to-face, and how the accountability piece to that. Also, our EL students have a very strict guideline of having that 30-day window of being assessed in order to see where they are along their EL needs, identifying our new students. So we're going to see what we're doing right now. We receive state waivers to allow us to bypass testing, but we don't know about what it'll look like in the fall if we'll still have those waivers.
And Shelley, in your preliminary conversations with your ADE contacts, do you see any mandates or deadlines waived?
As of right now, they're not waiving any deadlines. They only allow to the end of the school year. They're also in talks themselves, anticipating what the governor and recommendation will be with the health department. And so as of right now, they're not offering any waivers. We did receive word from the legislation that for our evaluation piece, non-federal, my other position, is we don't have waivers on the teacher evaluations. So we have to look at what it will look like to do teacher observations. They have to have a deadline. It's their right to make sure they're given the opportunity to be observed in their teaching format. We would have to relook at what that would look like in an online, but we do need to make sure we're protecting our teachers' rights.
So just to recap, even with just the two departments, we're trying to be innovative. We're trying to reach the needs of our community. We are really, you guys have spent a lot of time putting together this information. We're gathering information from our community, from our teachers, staff, but supportive services that are necessary to continue functioning are not being innovative. They're not being flexible, and they are going to be our borders that we have to operate within. So are we spinning our wheels too early? Are we doing all of this too soon if we can't operate outside of those, even just those two department guidelines?
That's a very good comment, Jen. And I don't believe we are. I believe getting our information together on what it would look like, how can we address and fit within those boundaries is exactly what we need to be doing. So yes, we have to look at SPED and EL in our school improvement situations as restrictions, but what can we do to keep our kids safe within those restrictions? But if they do allow us more room later, we're already prepared for the most restrictive. It's easier to kind of move outside that box. So I think we do need to jump in right away.
It does sometimes, Jen, feel that way. So I always would say to my students when I was teaching in the classroom, they'd say, why do we need this? Why are we doing this if we're not going to use it? We kind of had that same feeling. And I'd say, well, because we're growing synapses and our brains are evolving and we have learned how to build systems and structures. And so we'll just utilize what we learned from the process in a different avenue. But you'll also notice in every model, we sort of built in that, like in this online one you're looking on the screen. So we would love to go online if we close again, but we're leaving that opening for those mandated pieces, that traditional for qualifying SPED, so that she can meet the mandates and those kids can receive the services, but then the other piece of us can go another direction. But yeah, it does, that's spinning our wheels. Sometimes it does feel that way. I would agree. Erin, would you like to talk about where we are with budget and how you're feeling about us going forward?
I feel a lot worse after those last two. So I think we need to target a date as our kind of our drop dead for opening, and however that looks, we gotta get it open. Currently, I think mid-August, August 17th, I think is probably that, anytime on that date or beforehand is the best thing financially, because you're going to have fewer people going without pay for shorter periods of time. And as Vicki mentioned, every day we're not open is another increase in cost potentially. And we don't want to basically wreck our ability to provide education for years to come by trying to react to this appropriately. And so we have additional money coming in, but we also know that may not cover the entire thing. So I've also gone about starting to trim some of our programs in the budget to see if I can't free up more money. But I think the sooner we can open with whatever plan that is, the better.
Thanks, Erin. Angela, how is it going in HR? And Maybe if you don't mind, Angela, giving an update on some of the work you've been doing lately with unemployment and all that balancing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. So it's been very busy in HR and interesting to kind of look at everything. So definitely a large spike in unemployment claims that we've been responding to. Some of those claims are being made by people who are currently working and still employed with us. So I think there's a little bit of confusion out there as far as, you know, when people are eligible and when they are not. But the state makes all of those determinations, and we are just on the side of providing factual information back to the state in a timely manner so that they can make those appropriate decisions. So we've definitely seen a lot of that. We're really looking as a department on how to conduct business in a different way. So I think getting the contracts and at-will employment notices out this year was a good example of that. You know, we still have that piece that we had to do, but we had to look at how we could do it in an efficient way and in a safe way. And I think we really received a lot of positive feedback by utilizing DocuSign in that process and being able to just handle it all remotely, if you will. So I think some of the things that we're looking at coming up that are really going to come into play whenever we decide to reopen is, you know, what are we going to be? There's going to be probably a lot of employees that might be fearful of coming back, that might be putting in for leave, that might be asking for different accommodations. And so as a department, definitely something that we are starting on this week is creating decision trees, because there's been a lot of legislation out there really kind of directing us as far as, you know, when we need to do this and what appropriate questions do we need to be asking people when they call in and say, I can't come to work, or I want to be absent. And we have to do the analysis of, do we need them here? Do they have a reason to be able to request an accommodation? So lots of different things that we're going to need to make sure that we're very solid in our knowledge and how we're handling it so that we can be consistent from person to person and very thoughtful and addressing the employees' needs, but also making sure that we're, you know, getting people to work in the capacity that they can. And then just looking at how we can continue to do things differently. Like we talked about, we have really put a lot of effort into new employee orientation. And now we're talking about what that might look like if we film it. So just kind of toying around with ideas that we can definitely communicate and stay connected to all of the people that make the district work, but in a safe way.
Thank you, Angela. Jerry, do you have anything you want to add? You've been working with multiple people like myself.
No, we've been working on, you know, the calendars and the curriculum and different platforms that we get bombarded with every day, you know, to weed out what's even good enough to look at and go in depth with and have a webinar on, that kind of thing. So that's about it.
For example, one of the things we've been working on with Jerry's department is if we were to close again and go online or choose online as a choice model, do we use a vendor? Do we use a provided vendor curriculum? You can purchase it, or do the teachers that we hire to do online write the curriculum from square one? And so sort of doing a cost analysis between using a vendor. I think Jerry had one vendor, I can't recall the name.
So we're already with Study Island, the Edmentum family, and they have their own, they started their own online, and to read this to you, it's $550 a student if we supply the teacher. If we do not supply the teacher and we use one of their highly qualified teachers, it's $3,000.
So you could see how, yeah, using a teacher of record and a curriculum could be cost prohibitive. And so do we have the people and the training and the ability to grow our own, or do we need to do like a hybrid where it's partly us and then we purchase a curriculum? All those are the kinds of things that Jerry and her team are running through right now.
Right, and that's the cheapest quote I've gotten, and I think it's because we already are established with them, with the Edmentum company, with Study Island and Exact Path and Plato.
I know, Jen, you were really reading that data. Thank you very much. Thanks for taking the time to go through and look at all that data. And if you look line by line, who wants the schools to open versus not open, and do we have staff members who want to teach online? We do have some staff members that are willing, because we did that in the survey too. For anybody who's watching this that doesn't have access to all that data, we do have some teachers who would love to be full-time online teachers. We do have some teachers that would love to be part-time online teachers, but I don't know. We'd have to really find out which families truly want that choice, and does that correlate with the number of people willing and able to do it? So that would be the next step in research as well. All right, well, so that in a nutshell, I don't know how long we've been on, but that in a nutshell is everything we're thinking about. I just want to give you an overview that there are so many moving pieces. You know, every department that's represented here today with Shelley and Vicki and Aaron and Angela and Rob, and then there are other subcomponents to those departments, is working on all cylinders to try to tackle research and information that pertains to any one of these given models, and then keep all of that information live among all of our employees. It's kind of an exciting time. So I'm going to pass the baton to our board. We're so lucky to have the board that we have during all of this. And I don't know if you, Mr. President, how you want to tackle this going forward. There doesn't have to be a decision made today. This is just a workshop where we're sort of starting this decision process. I will tell you the state is supposed to have us information by the end of May, which is looming. We haven't received any yet as far as recommendations and resources, but I'm going to hand it to you, Mr. Lucero.
Okay, well, I think if we can go around and just find out kind of where every board member's at, if they have some questions, and I'll go ahead and start. And I love Jen's comment about the borders that we are working in, because we do have some confinement, and I appreciate all the research and all the data that you've done. I was so proud to be a board member when KUSD reacted the way they did and the services they provided the students in such a quick manner. We did do an excellent job. But I think we have to remember we can only do what's in our control. And our number one mission is providing education for students, preparing them, like our mission statement says, for lifelong success. And I just want to make sure as we're going through this and we're talking about providing online education, that is something we can be excellent at what we do. And if we can be excellent at it, then we may need to, in my opinion, step back and find out how we can be excellent. And maybe that's something we cannot provide in July or August or September. Maybe it's something we can provide in July in 2021, but maybe not 2020. So I just want to make sure that we are able to prepare ourselves for that, because there are a lot of online resources out there that provide excellent education to students. And I just want to make sure that KUSD can match those, because one format or one schedule or so forth that I didn't see was just doing traditional, just going back to traditional and doing everything that's in our power as far as sanitation goes, as far as being smart goes, and educating students, parents, staff members, and so forth, because I think we could be excellent at that. I know we run the risk of losing maybe 20% of our student population, but I think the number one thing is we have to, whatever we do, we have to make sure that we're doing it in the best and excellent manner that we can, because we do that. I'm confident we do that right now with our traditional format. As far as school opening and dates and so forth, for me, I think there's a lot of factors that we have to weigh in on, but the later we wait, the better, because it just gives us more time to be prepared, and it gives us more data on how to be safe with our students. So I'll pass it on to Beth. Do you have any comments?
I do. Thank you. Number one, yes, the kudos. I have been so proud of our district and all the staff and all the teachers, everybody. I mean, bus drivers, it's been great. I mean, not great for the time, but good, really great how we were able to deal with it. I have several comments. Number one, I think we need to be talking to our attorney and have several waivers that parents are signing when they're enrolling their child again for school. And then for after school activities and sports, have we discussed that? If it's outdoors, we'll be safer, obviously, depending on the heat. And then additional waivers that the attorney has ready for that type of participation too, because masks won't be available, will not be healthy in a sport. Another thing that I think of is masks should be mandatory. I know school is required. It's mandatory for teachers for parents to have their children educated. We want as many kids in our count as we can get, but we have to have that safety component. And plexiglass is only around the desks or whatever. If we have the groups of 4 and we have the plexiglass dividing them, then they could take their mask off. But all of that hygiene is so critical that I think we have to require masks. And if parents don't agree philosophically that that should be done, then they can keep their child home. They can do the online. We have to offer both the online and the traditional, is my feeling. And I believe we should open July 22nd. The more time we actually have school during the summer heat, the more we're participating in our community being able to move forward, and more likelihood of having more instruction before the second big surge this fall. Those are my big comments.
Beth, would you repeat your last one? What you said right before we have the surge? When were you suggesting the calendar start?
The earliest open date, July 22nd. The more time we can get instruction in, especially the one-on-one time, in traditional, before we have the big surge in the fall, which is expected, which may not hit us, but that we are providing that education before the surge will be helpful for our students and our community to be able to have employment.
Okay, how about Carol, and then we'll finish with Jen.
Okay, I'm for traditional. Come back, all the students come back. Mainly because I'm really concerned about the broadband issues and the cost. I think that's a good option for future, that we could be a beta test, but I am for the traditional. I feel like August 3rd would be a better time to start, give us more time to get the answers that we need. I don't want to wait any longer past that if it's not necessary. I'm not sure that we should mandate masks, and we're going to get flack from parents either way. Whether we mandate it, whether we don't mandate it, whether we give them a choice, we're going to get a lot of flack. And I agree with Beth, we do need waivers for parents on some of the issues. That's all I have.
Thanks,
Oh,
Carol.
I do want to thank the staff and administration and all the teachers, because I think you've done a super job, and I just can't say enough how proud I am.
Thanks, Carol. How about Jen now?
So my thought is, this is an opportunity for us to improve our instruction and to come into the 21st century finally. I like the idea that we have an online option. There are families that, if we say we're going traditional, they're going to go K-12. They're going to go online. They're going to go with Primavera. They're not going to make the risk. So by not offering an option, we're going to lose student population. And for every student that decides, you know what, you're not looking out for the health of my student, so I'm going to go online, that's budget that we lose. So we do need to be thinking about that. And there are qualified educators in our district that would do a really good job. We just have to do a better job at finding them. And there are ways to evaluate teachers and their online instruction. We just have to do a better job at evaluating them. None of this, in my opinion, is an all or nothing. I think we need to be doing a better job of reaching the students and the families where they are. And I think it's about time, honestly. And for the traditional option, we need to be thinking about masks. I do think that masks should be mandatory. And it's not about you and your opinion. It's about the safety of those who have an opposite or opinion, or, have other health issues. And it isn't just about the kids. It's about the staff. It's about the teachers. So we do need to think about that. We also need to think about how we're going to enforce that, if that is what we're going to do. And then if we say, it's up to you, is it a stars upon theirs sort of situation where now you have kids picking on kids that have a mask and kids that don't have a mask? I think either we say you do have to do it, or we need to be prepared for managing that interaction, because that conversation is going to be happening at home. And, that teacher is going to be forced to deal with that. And we need to be prepared as a district and have that conversation with teachers on how that conversation would go. Something else we need to think about in the traditional is movement of students. It isn't just what we do when they're there, but the movement of lines down a hallway. Do we have a one-way rule where, I'm thinking of Wallapai, got that circle. We're not going to have lines crossing each other, because then you've got, more exposure. The CDC came out with information saying that exposure is less likely through contacting objects, and it is definitely more of a respiratory aerosolized respiration. So that is our issue, I think. And studies have shown that they've found the coronavirus on the opposite side of filters, even in hospitals where they are requiring really good filtration. So how good are we planning to be? If we're not going to be really good, why not? Why even try or spend the money if it isn't going to be effective? My thought is the later we can push it, the better, without, getting to the point where we can't financially function or where we are out of compliance. It does give us a little bit more time to make those decisions, because this is an ever evolving thing. I think that when you talk about a surge, Beth, that they are expecting a surge in the fall, I think that was dependent upon when states went full yay, Memorial Day at the lake. So we just saw even yesterday 21 new cases versus 4 the previous day. So when you talk about a surge, that would require a lull, and I don't think we're even going to see that. So this gives us, the later we push it, this gives us more information and gives it time for those IDEA and ADA and ADE and the governor to kind of see the data. Hopefully we are still evaluating it as a state, and we'll get more guidance from the top. So those are just some of my ideas. Gretchen is probably sick of my texting. What do you think about this? How about that? But this is just such a difficult decision because we're, like you said, Gretchen, we're never going to make everyone happy. But we have to remember our goals is to educate students. But we also maybe need to add a goal that we need to be innovative and flexible and recognize that education looks different now. That is all. Thank you guys so much. You have been wonderful. Everyone I've talked to throughout the community, they are just so thankful for what KUSD has done to feed them, what KUSD has done to just reach out and connect with them. Especially in a time of quarantine, just that little connection has been huge. So I just want to say thank you guys.
Thanks, Jen. And we definitely need to be innovative because education after all this is going to look different. And I think in the future when students enroll at KUSD, they're gonna have to check a box. Are you doing the online education or the traditional education? I just want to make sure we're ready when they check the box for the online education because we have so many at-risk students. We need to make sure that everyone has equitable access to education.
Right. Yeah, I don't mean to interrupt, Troy, but Rob, will you go back to slide 3? I just wanted, while we're having these conversations, slide 1, 2, 3, keep going back. One more. Yep. These were the trends, and I loved hearing each of the board members speak about what's on their heart and mind because it kind of does fall into what we're talking about. So I think, Charlie, a distinction I agree with you that we need to make, and we had this conversation, more people than not are interested in traditional because we understand the value, but we want to evolve and be an online provider as well. But in that interim, in the short term, maybe we should use a different word than online because it's a bridge to online. So it's digital or it's streamed or it's virtual, but it's not going to be the true online, but we will evolve to a true online. So I agree when all of you say whatever we do, we have to be great at it. So what version of distant learning can we be great at? And I think Rob's probably hearing me say this, and Jerry, when we continue our research, we'll continue it through that lens that you talk about. Yeah, we can't just say, here's an online provider and go, because I just don't think that'll work for a lot of them. Some families are good to go. And then I wanted Beth, a couple of you talked about waivers and sports. We do have the ability to allow some athletics practices now, and we do have a waiver. We have them signing a waiver of participation, and we will work with our lawyer on other kinds of waivers moving forward. That's a great point that I did not mention. And then
Beth, were you suggesting that students that or families that chose traditional sign a waiver just saying I recognize that my student being in populated area, that sort of thing? Is that what you were suggesting?
That, and I don't want our district being sued because we didn't perform a good education for their student. I mean, we have extreme times and we need people to sign off that they understand these are extreme times. Here's the effects that are going to be possible, and you understand that you are in this risk with us.
What about waivers for staff and teachers? that
We probably need those too.
that you're expected to participate face to face, and here's the risks to that. Or
Yeah, because we can list all the things that we're doing procedurally and that they will agree to follow them, and then that they will hold the school harmless if they do end up with anything, because we can't control everything.
Can I make a comment on waivers? My main concern, I'm not against online or digital, but my main concern, and this is from being a network engineer with Frontier, is having enough capacity, bandwidth, and not just on our end, but on the parent side. Will we have a waiver if for some reason they can't maintain their internet connection?
The waiver I'm talking about is traditional. And then if they are not willing to sign that, they can go do the online, and that would be their choice.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But what if my student can't get connection to the school, and it's not the school's fault, but it's their connection?
Right. Well, that's where I know that the school, you guys are working on that technology, and how do we get around that? The state is working on that also. But the reality is, it's what can we do? We have to protect us for what we can do. And the state law protects us if we can't offer what they're actually wanting. Because if we can't offer what they want, that's a matter of their expectations, and they have to choose something else instead of pointing their finger at us. I am so into the idea that it's not our responsibility to be the end all for everybody.
And I understand that. We can have all the bandwidth in the world here, but the parents may not be able to have that same capacity. Right. And they may not be able to do it every day. So I'm concerned about that. We may have to tell them, if you can't provide the network that you need, then they may have to do the traditional.
Right. So Carol, Rob, if you go to the traditional choice slide, that's something we talked quite a bit about, and we want to be able to provide traditional and alternative models and the unique needs of all of our families be met. But you'll notice, I don't know if I have it on here. If they choose the online, we talked about they have to qualify. So in order to be able to do that, do you have the capacity, the desire? Like, it would be almost like an application process so that we could ensure they would be successful. We don't want to set anyone up for failure. And if you don't have the capacity or the ability to have it, and we can't provide it, then traditional would be your only choice. Does that make sense?
That's exactly what that's what I'm thinking. Yes.
Unfortunately, the reality is we may have some parents so upset that they don't like any of it that that's when we have to tell them, I'm sorry, we would love to teach your child, but you'll have to find another method, because this is all we are capable of doing.
Aaron?
If we were to do something like that and lose, like Charlie said earlier in the meeting, 20%, would we be willing to look at reducing staff by 20% as well? Or would we keep staff the same and just lose out on that money and make our ability to move forward that much more difficult?
Right. And according to our parent surveys, they voted, if you will. It wasn't a vote, but they responded in fairly large blocks. I think only 12 to 15% would be interested in any kind of online. And then that number will probably reduce the closer we get to school opening. So I don't foresee large blocks of people voting with their feet and leaving. Even some people will say, and I think Beth is right, well, we don't like any of these choices, but we'll go with this one. And then it's up to us, like Charlie and Jen, like you all said, to be great at it. We communicate and we're great at everything we offer, then that will resolve some of the fears. I'm going to use graduation as an example. Did you guys watch our virtual graduations? They were pretty awesome. And so before that virtual. Still, there are people that want live, and we still want to provide a live opportunity at a future date. But we did a great job at those virtuals, and that reduced a lot of fears. So the same mindset can be said about these models and going forward. We will, I promise you, I pledge to you, our team will do a great job in the planning, the research, and the execution, and then that will reduce the number of people who feel like they need to leave. Okay. That's my spiel.
Well, I have complete confidence in you and your team. I do. I'm just concerned about the finances and being able to afford some of the broadband and things that's going to be required.
We agree. Go, Aaron.
Am I incorrect in thinking that what kind of broadband can the community offer? These two companies, we're talking about what can our community pay for? What can the companies even offer? Like, do they even have the capability?
Absolutely.
Golden Valley is very, very limited. And we may, these hotspot ideas, I think, are going to be the only thing for some of these families that whatever the state or we can end up providing for some of these families, or the centers for them to come to check in or whatever. That's details that I can't comprehend at the moment. I know there's going to be a lot of those kind of details. But I don't expect very many parents would refuse to sign the waiver if they want the traditional school.
Dr. Dorner, I think one outcome of our workshop or meeting is you need to get a feel of when school's going to start. I think teachers are waiting for that, students and families. So do you want that decision made today, or do you have a better understanding of where you think we're heading, or when do you want to know that date by?
Rob, will you go back to the second slide? You're the best slide advancer or devancer. Second one more. Yeah, so basically, if we review our workshop goals, the teacher and me, I gave you the objective. Now I go back and see if we met our objectives, and I'm going to ask for some direction. We reviewed all of the surveys, the CDC. We looked at some possible calendars and instructional models. I took copious notes on everything y'all said. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and vision. So really, we're looking for some recommendations, and I did hear a variety when the four of you spoke. I don't think we need to say today on May 26th or opening on the 22nd, the traditional calendar, or August 17th. But I would like to come back and have almost like a deadline day, if you will, in a couple of weeks. We're still going to, a couple of things. One, I think I did not hear anybody migrating toward the idea of an alternate calendar. And I will tell you that the majority of our people were not migrating toward that either. So am I hearing from the board that you would like us to focus on a traditional calendar with some alternative choice? Is that?
I believe so.
As far as planning?
I think so.
Am I correct in hearing that we can have the alternate on the back burner in case things evolve or change with the pandemic and we really have to reduce, but that's not our agreed upon preferred model? That's correct.
You're talking about the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday hybrid. The thought of providing direct instruction only 2 days a week, I just can't see how that's possible.
Okay.
I think, it could have worked if we were at the end of the school year and we were, reinforcing content, but to deliver content, I don't see how it's going to be possible.
So our teams will focus on, and I think Beth and Carol and Charlie were leaning that same way, more of the traditional.
Plus online.
Plus, I know Charlie traditional, and if we were to have a digital component, it would need to be really well done. And I think maybe delivered differently than just a traditional online.
Correct. And keeping in mind of having equal access to that for all students.
Okay. So that our team will work on that now. And then really the start date, regardless of the 22nd, the 3rd, the 17th, we'll still work on any of those 3 calendar start dates. We'll still start with a similar model. And so we can work on that, I guess, is my point. and then we can decide on the actual start date as we watch things evolve in the next couple of weeks. And more importantly, the state gives us their information on what their task teams have found and when the finances might be available for Mr. Sherman to work with. So I think we're in a holding pattern, but we have a good vision for what our team can focus in on and work with as we wait for those answers.
I would agree with all that.
Good.
Okay. Team, all of my directors, are you comfortable with what you heard? Like, kind of move forward with our instructional delivery model while we wait for more information on funding and dates. Okay.
I feel very comfortable.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm definitely on board. I'm glad that we, Gretchen, if I heard you right, it's July 22nd, the 3rd, or the 17th.
Well, and I'm not throwing the first out. We may come of September, depending on what evolves over the next couple of weeks. But
okay.
Financially, yeah, we are all crossing our fingers that we have good news as far as the pandemic. I don't have this one to share, but maybe you can see it. Vicki shared this one this morning, that this side, the blue is Mojave County cases. And Vicki, I don't know if you have it. Oh, she had to step into another meeting. There was a major spike in Mojave County, but the orange line is Kingman. So there's a very big difference, and part of what's happening with our numbers is the critical situation on the reservations in Peach Springs. That's a really major contributor to our numbers, according to our health department sources. Not that, that should inform our decisions, because honestly, and I didn't mention this earlier, we have 70 kiddos in Kingman High School who are Peach Springs residents. And so kind of like we talked about with special ed and some of the other things, we've talked with Mr. Ward about, even if we do move ahead in late July, mid-August, or September, we may have to have an alternate plan for our Peach Springs kiddos if they're still under lockdown. So we will monitor it daily, and all of you keep emailing and texting. I love it. It takes all of our minds to make the best decision.
So Gretchen, just because I have a little bit of information as they're coming into the hospital, just wait till the end of the week is what I will say is Kingman numbers.
Do what? What was that last part?
When you're waiting for Kingman numbers.
Oh, wait till the end of the week?
It takes 3 days.
They're a little behind? Okay. Yep. Thank you.
So are we ready to wrap it up for today? All right. Well, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion and second by Ms. Weiser. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, everyone. Have a great week.
You too.
Bye.